sit here and then I'll move up. You'll hear the cue. Yeah. Can they see me, Chris? On Zoom?
Your camera's on.
There you go.
You muted, so.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone on Zoom. I see you. Can you see me? I think they can. Okay. So I wanted to welcome everyone tonight. This is one of our very, very special nights, commemorating Kristallnacht and Friedrich Schweitzer lecture. I'm Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. I am the director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center, and I'm also a professor of religious studies. So we are honored here tonight with the presence of a first-class scholar and my dear friend, Victoria Barnett. But before I introduce her, I would like to highlight the reason that we host our Kristallnacht commemoration every year, because of the founder of the center and past director, Friedrich Schweitzer, who has been a supporter and historian of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. He is prolific as ever, and tonight I want to draw your attention to his memoir entitled What Love Can Do, which I read last June just before his 92nd birthday. I sat immersed, holding on to his memories and love for his wife, Jackie, who proclaimed that he had a Jewish heart. Fred also writes that, quote, my work was not static free. However, a few students, alumni, and faculty felt I was undermining the church and complained that I was the cause of a scandal. And he goes on to explain how the prior president of Manhattan College, President Thomas Gallon, was also very supportive. The reverberations of his challenges of doing such work as a non-Jew during that time of his life, in the 1970s, when at this time most Catholic and Christian institutions were just beginning to grapple with a deep-rooted anti-Semitism and sense of responsibility of their own history and the destructive history of Jewish-Christian relations. As he wrote to me yesterday evening, this is from Fred, on text, anti-Semitism is the eternal chameleon, constantly changed and adapted to different circumstances. Outbreaks of anti-Semitism have little or nothing to do with what Jews do, say, or are. Recurrences are owing to the need of a ruler or party for a scapegoat, for his failures and weaknesses. It is not simply that Jews are a small, vulnerable group. It is also because anti-Semitic firebrands draw on a tremendous arsenal of ideological weapons. The ideas and attitudes set forth in those nearly 100 seminal anti-Semitic treatises in all European languages, but not confined to them, that have appeared and reinforced each other over 2 millennia. He goes on to say, the longest hatred is always with us, latent or blatant, too massive to destroy root and branch. One can only hope to contain it by logic and fact. In the meantime, one hopes the storm will pass, that its utter irrationality will halt it, that public figures will speak out in condemnation of it, and that public authority will prosecute and convict. Dr. Schweitzer was brave and courageous then, and he began his journey as a German-born Christian to tell the world and Christian institutions that we have to deal directly with anti-Semitism and hatred. We must confront our reality and our own history if we want to have dialogue, no matter how painful it is. So thank you, Fred, for your passion and love for the other. You are a model to all of us. Let's give him applause, please.
A footnote, I was 8 years old at Kristallnacht. I didn't know anything about it, but I learned from my parents in due time. And I must thank them. They always said, Jews are human beings like everyone else, only more so.
For those on the Zoom, Fred just talked about the fact that he was 8 years old during Kristallnacht, and that his parents taught him that Jews were human beings, even more so. So just to communicate that to you. So tonight is very special, and before I introduce our speaker and honored guest, I would like to do something we do every year in the name of the victims of the Holocaust, but also of other genocides that have taken place before the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. It's important that we commemorate 6 million Jews tonight, and my center is dedicated to the memory and the lessons of the Holocaust. But my center also is dedicated to all human beings. Our mission is about eradicating human suffering. And I insist on that every year and every moment of my life. And a lot of my students are here and probably are sick of hearing that. But we must work hard together. And working together and hard together is actually a lot of fun, at least to me. So let me just tell you that the term Holocaust literally means a fire that causes total destruction. Yehuda Bauer, one of the world's most eminent historians of the Holocaust, differentiates between the term genocide and Holocaust by defining the term genocide as partial murder. While there have been numerous instances of genocide, the total annihilation of people was never an officially sanctioned purpose of a national government as it was in Nazi Germany. It is precisely this which differentiates the Nazi action against the Jews from other genocidal attempts against the people. Tonight we commemorate the murder of millions because their religion, the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, and their nationality was not welcome, but it was threatening. I now invite our students to come one by one, where they will light candles for genocides that have occurred over time. And while they're doing that, I want to invite Cantor Joshua Finkel from the Riverdale Temple to come and say a prayer. And let me just, before you do that, take the name of 14 genocides. Holocaust, Herero, Holodomor, Armenia, Cambodia, Guatemala, Rwanda, Bosnia, Kazakhs, Uyghurs, Rohingyas, Yazidis, Bangladesh, and Native Americans. Please come up, Cantor, and the students can start coming up as the Cantor begins the prayer.
If you're comfortable doing so, I do invite you to rise for this initial prayer. ולרחמים, שוכן מרומים. המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות כל אחינו בני ארצנו, אנשים, נשים וטף, שנהרגו, שנשרפו, שנגלו, ונחנקו מפני גזענות ושנאת חינם בגן עדן מקדם תהי מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן. God, full of compassion, dwelling on high, find perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of your presence, among the holy and the pure who shine with the light of the heavens. For the souls of all our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, men, women, and children who have been killed, burned, and lynched because of racism and baseless hate. May the Garden of Eden be their resting place. O please, Master of compassion, keep them in the shelter of your wings for eternity, and bind up their souls in the bond of life. The eternal is their inheritance. May they rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen. If you would like to be seated at this time, you may do so. It's my tradition around Kristallnacht to commemorate Kristallnacht by celebrating the music of the German Jewish community, which the Nazis tried and failed to eradicate on that fateful evening. And I'd like to share with you one of my favorite melodies for a well-known text shared by Christianity as well as Judaism. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach, the righteous shall flourish like a date palm in Lebanon. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach, Keres Mavonon Yizke, Echad law of God brings light to the eyes. Torah Adonai, Temim ho, Edut Adonai, Nemana, Hikudei Adonai, Yishorim, Mitzvat Adonai, Moro, Yirat Adonai, Teoro, Mishpatei Adonai, Yemet, Tzadku Yachdav, Tzadku Yachdav.
Thank you so much, Cantor Joshua Finkel. We really appreciate you being here. Prayer, rhythm, tone, all of these things are the beauty that God has bestowed upon us, and we must thank those gifts for all of us tonight. I just wanted to say one more thing before I introduce Vicky, is that this month, Deborah Liebstadt, who is the envoy for the U.S. State Department of Anti-Semitism, said in an interview that what's different about anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism today is that, quote, she's saying, but we're seeing normalization of it. And she says that it becomes okay to say certain things. And whether it's, I don't want to focus on one rapper, she says, because the problem is much bigger than that, as you just acknowledged. But it becomes okay, she says. I just heard a story of a kid in Montclair, New Jersey, who walked into the playground or the schoolyard, and her friends, one of her friends, gave other kids and gave the Nazi salute. You know, or throw pennies on the ground because Jews are cheap. I want to get every penny, or say all sorts of those kinds of things. So it's both physically dangerous, and as you know, we just commemorated the anniversary of the Tree of Life Synagogue, where people were just murdered for going to a synagogue. And the rise, as you all know, since 2016 of anti-Semitism has startled our country. And tonight, I hope we can understand that the history of anti-Semitism is dangerous. The rise of anti-Semitism is dangerous. The rise of hatred is dangerous. The rise of Islamophobia is dangerous. The rise of black racism is dangerous. The rise of transphobia is dangerous. The rise of homophobia is dangerous. The rise of any murder against a human being for who they are is dangerous. So we are blessed tonight with Vicky Barnett, who actually I was really honored to meet about 10, 11 years ago. And it's because of her that I'm on a committee on the program of Ethics, Religion, and Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. But Vicky and I were fortunate enough to teach her last seminar at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum before COVID on interreligious approaches to the Holocaust, which is a phenomenal opportunity for me and for Vicki to have invited me as her co-teacher. And what happens in these seminars is that we teach other scholars who are doing this kind of work. Victoria Barnett is one of the world's preeminent scholars of religion and the Holocaust, as well as the leading expert on the German Protestant theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Most recently, Barnett served as a director of programs on ethics, religion, and Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She's a graduate of Indiana University, Union Theological Seminary, New York, so she was here for a bit, and George Mason University. Her dissertation was a historical case study of the National Conference of Christians and Jews from 1933 to 1948. She's the author of For the Soul of the People, Protestant Protest Against Hitler from Oxford University Press in 1992, Bystanders, Conscience and Complicity During the Holocaust, Greenwood Press, 1999, and editor and translator of Wolfgang Gerlach's And the Witnesses Were Silent, The Confessing Church and the Jews, University of Nebraska Press, 2000, and the new revised edition of Eberhard Bethge's Dietrich Bonhoeffer, A Biography, 2000. She has written numerous articles, book chapters in the churches during the Holocaust, is the author of the website Article on Dietrich Bonhoeffer published in the Holocaust Museum's website. Vicki is now teaching and has accepted a university appointment as Frank Talbot Jr. Endowed Visiting Professor for the 2022-2023 academic year at UVA. Vicki, we're so pleased to have you. Please come up to the podium.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? It is such a pleasure and honor to be here this evening, especially to honor Frederick Schweitzer, whom I first met many years ago when I first began to attend Holocaust conferences in this country. He has made so many contributions to the field of Holocaust studies, not least of which is this remarkable center at Manhattan College. And as Manaz said, we met some time ago, but our friendship and our work together has meant so much to me. And the last seminar we co-taught together at the museum was the best one I've ever done. And that was in no small part due to you. And we also got the largest number of applications we ever got for those seminars. So it really is a pleasure to be here this evening. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. Kristallnacht anniversaries. This is a remarkable anniversary that is commemorated throughout this country and throughout the world, 84 years after it happened. That is in part because it sent such a shock at the time and still stands out today as a truly awful moment in an awful period. The numbers, the statistics, the familiar photographs that we've all seen convey something of that shock. The mass arrests and imprisonment of 30,000 Jewish men, young and old. Hundreds of synagogues torched and desecrated across Germany and Austria. Over 7,500 Jewish businesses destroyed. And at least 91 Jewish individuals murdered, although we know that the actual number was probably much higher, especially if we include the number of suicides that followed this event. And yet the true nature of Kristallnacht, I think, is not in the smashing of buildings and businesses and windows. It sits much deeper in those who lived through it and those who continue to survive the aftermath of the Holocaust today. It left the kind of trauma that people can't shake off, that sits in your bones, that influences the rest of their lives. And that is best conveyed by the personal memories of people who lived through it. One of those people was a man named Dietrich Goldschmidt, whom I interviewed in Berlin back in the 1980s. Goldschmidt's father was Jewish, his mother was not. Like so many Germans in their situation, their family was torn apart and their lives permanently changed by National Socialism. They initially hoped that the Nazi racial laws would not affect them, but in 1933 his older brother lost his job because of the new racial laws and was forced to immigrate to England, followed soon after by his sister. Goldschmidt had just started his university studies and remained in Germany with his parents in Potsdam. Luckily, his father was out of town the night of November 9th, when the Gestapo showed up at the family apartment. What followed was a terrifying night for Dietrich Goldschmidt and his mother. Officers ransacked the apartment, they took things, they went through everything, and when they were finished, they arrested Goldschmidt and took him down to the police station. After many hours, he was released because of his so-called mixed heritage. But a family acquaintance, the son of very close friends, was taken to the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen. Released about 7 weeks later, silent, thin, fearful, refusing to speak about his experience. We know that the Jews who were imprisoned after Kristallnacht were ordered not to say anything after their release. After that night, an elderly aunt told Goldschmidt that the worst was yet to come, and that before the Nazis took her anywhere, she would kill herself. And she did. She committed suicide when the deportations of Berlin Jews began. Goldschmidt's father decided, after November 9th, that the time had come for them to try to get out of Germany. He managed to get a visa to England. His wife and son did not. And so they stayed in Germany through the war, hoping that his mixed race status would protect him. That remained the case until 1944, when he was sent to a forced labor camp. But long before then, they had become increasingly isolated and fearful. Those whom they loved were gone, and they were surrounded by their non-Jewish neighbors who quickly moved on and lived as if nothing had happened. By 1938, German Jews were used to that kind of dual life, that kind of isolated experience, to the everyday harassment and the growing number of restrictions on their everyday life. There were more than 1,200 laws passed in Nazi Germany between 1933 and 1938 that increasingly restricted every level of human existence for German Jews. But the pogroms of November 1938 escalated that sense of isolation and fear to an entirely new level, because it was an overwhelming violation of what little space still remained to them. A place where they could live with dignity, feel somewhat secure, where they thought that perhaps they might weather the storm. Those small communal spaces within the family, in the synagogues, in the community centers, where they could live surrounded by loved ones, friends, with some sense of security. For many, it was almost the last point of continuity they had with the lives that they had lived before 1933. All of that was shattered on November 9th. There was an entirely new level of anxiety, a dread. What might happen if they went out in public, or when their children or their elderly members of their communities went out? German Jews had to watch every step, surrounded by numerous signs of people behaving as if nothing had happened, and public enthusiasm for the new regime, the banners, the marches, the rallies, and the constant barrage of ugly propaganda that singled Jews out as enemies, as vermin, as less than human, as threats to Germany. The story of the German Jewish community between 1933 and 1938 is an incredible story of a resilient community that came together under growing persecution, creative, trying to create spaces in which they could continue to live. And this story is all the more poignant because before 1933, who could have imagined that anything like this would happen? Germany was their home. Many Jewish families have roots that went back for generations. Indeed, much of Germany's reputation as a vibrant culture of intellectual life, music, art, philosophy, was due to the remarkable contributions of its Jewish citizens. In 1935, the German Jewish author and philosopher Margarete Zussmann, writing from exile in Switzerland, described how this had shaken German Jews to the core, shaking their understandings of who they were and where they belonged. The rise of Nazism in Germany took German Jews back to a world that they thought they had escaped. The centuries of anti-Semitic hatred and violence that have been part of the Jewish story throughout history and continue up into our own times. She wrote, these are her words, "A storm comes over a deep and unquestioningly rooted life, stronger than any earthly thunderstorm, rips it out of the earth in which it stood, the orders in which it was rooted. It was like a tree, its divinely ordered landscape and the world around it. Now it has become something else, something that neither grows nor takes root, is homeless in the landscape where it stands." And she continued to ponder, these are her words, "The dreadful fate that strikes the Jew every time he has become too deeply part of an earthly fatherland, too totally merged with a foreign culture. Something incomprehensible is coming over the German Jewish community." Can you hear, is this better? Sorry. Okay, I'll try to speak. Is that all right? I don't want to, I'm feeling an echo here, but I don't want to. Okay, I'll start the quote again. "Something incomprehensible is coming over the German Jewish community, a new and deepened experience of their being torn out of the created order, and this time, in a moment in which it has become impossible to split their identity from German culture without tearing the entire fabric apart." End of quote. Who were they after November 1938? What was their future? Although written in 1935, Zussmann's words are a haunting description of what happens when the events of history intrude into and completely disrupt someone's personal existence. When the police come into your apartment and they go through your things and take your son down to the police station, and then you hear from friends that their son was taken to a concentration camp. When you hear that your sanctuary, your place of worship, has been violated and desecrated. When one terrible thing leads to the next, your spouse finds exile in another country, but you are unable to phone, beloved relatives kill themselves, or are murdered in the camps. This is a historic date, but I'm describing something much bigger than a date. This is what happens when history, not just dates, not just events, but the storms of dramatic historical change, the storms that Zussmann was describing, interrupt and upend and transform personal lives. But the events of November 1938 did not affect only thousands of German Jews. It also affected their neighbors and the outside world, because this was their history as well. What did this historical moment mean for the non-Jewish population? For a few brief weeks, the events of November 9th got the world's attention. It was front-page news in American newspapers. There were strong condemnations from religious leaders in the United States. There was a national radio broadcast from Catholic University in Washington of Catholic religious and political leaders, and another national broadcast featuring Protestant leaders. Here in New York City, the Federal Council of Churches, a national Protestant organization with 33 member churches, declared November 20th, 1938 to be a national day of prayer for the victims of racial and religious oppression. President Roosevelt condemned the pogroms, and the United States recalled its ambassador to Germany, the only country to do so. There were national protests throughout the United States, marches and rallies, raising hopes that the United States might finally lift its quotas and accept more refugees. Churches in particular rallied behind the Wagner-Rogers bill in early 1939 to take in 20,000 children. But as we know, the Wagner-Rogers bill didn't even make it out of the committee. The Congress of the United States did not want to rescue even 20,000 children. And inevitably, the uproar died down and the world moved on to the next thing. 7 years later, the world would again acknowledge the awfulness of what had happened, now in its final stages, where 6 million human beings had been murdered, and the genocide of the European Jews was stopped only by the Allied victory in 1945. Students of the Holocaust are familiar with the so-called gray zones of complicity and compromise, the slippery slope by which non-Jewish Germans became involved in the Nazi project, step by step. The process by which they distanced themselves from their Jewish neighbors, joined the Nazi party, made one compromise after another until they found themselves deeply involved, complicit, and in some cases, actual perpetrators. This has been the focus of my own work on the churches and the so-called bystanders. But this evening I'd like to reflect with you about the gray zones of conscience and our own place in history, because that short-lived international reaction in 1938 has always haunted me. There was the potential there to do something. Why does outrage die down? Why does it not build toward a more effective, organized effort to address a crisis like this? Why does it not translate into policy, into change that will actually move leaders to do something?